They conquered kingdoms, crushed empires, and bent the world to their will. But in the tangled green heart of Vietnam, even the Mongols met something stronger than fear, something they could not break. The Mongols, horsemen of the apocalypse, conquerors of continents, they crushed cities under iron hooves and rewrote the map of the world. But in the dense jungles of Vietnam, they lost. This is the story of how a small kingdom stood against the greatest military machine in history and won. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. By the mid-13th century, the Mongols had defeated the Jin dynasty, shattered the Khwarezmian Empire, and stormed into Eastern Europe. They had burned Baghdad to the ground, ended the Abbasid Caliphate, and reached the shores of the Adriatic. Empires crumbled before their precision, brutality, and discipline. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, had just declared himself emperor of the Yuan dynasty in China, uniting Mongol ambition with Chinese administration. But to the south lay a defiant kingdom, Jai Viet, led by the Tran dynasty, a people with rich traditions, a deep connection to the land, an unmatched knowledge of the terrain. To the Mongols, Vietnam was a minor territory in their path. To the Vietnamese, it was home, and they were prepared to die for it. The terrain advantage, Vietnam's natural fortress. Vietnam's geography was the first, and perhaps greatest, weapon against the Mongols. Mountain ranges to the north, endless rivers, monsoons, sweltering humidity, dense foliage. Mongol cavalry, their greatest advantage, became a burden here. The steppes gave the Mongols speed. Vietnam gave them mud, insects, and rain, and the Vietnamese turned their homeland into a weapon. No wide-open fields for horse archers. No easy terrain for fast communication. Just labyrinths of rice paddies, marshes, and thick canopy that swallowed invaders. First invasion, 1257 to 1258. The probe that broke. In 1257, Mongols under Urianka Dai invaded via Yunnan. Thang Long, modern-day Hanoi, was captured, but held only briefly. Tran Tai Tong's strategic retreat allowed for regrouping and guerrilla attacks. The Mongols couldn't resupply, couldn't adapt, and withdrew under heavy losses. The Mongols weren't defeated in a single battle. They were devoured by 1,000 cuts, from jungle sickness, hunger, and constant harassment. Diplomacy and deception. The calm before the storm. Kublai Khan demanded submission. The Vietnamese sent tribute, but refused vassal status. Spies were sent. Political pressure mounted. Tran Hung Jiao, a nobleman and military genius, began preparing in secret. Stockpiling weapons, mapping the terrain, organizing a citizen militia. Vietnam bought time with diplomacy, but prepared for war with resolve. The court debated, submit or resist, but in temples and villages, the people trained. They forged weapons under cover of night, built secret caches, and passed down war chants alongside prayers. Second invasion, 1284 to 1285. Fire in the jungle. The Mongols launched a massive invasion, 100,000 troops by land, another fleet through Champa. The Vietnamese retreated south, scorched earth behind them. Mongol forces spread thin. Vietnamese counterattacked. At Chuong Duong and Ham Tu, Vietnamese forces routed elite Mongol units. Massive casualties, retreat, and collapse. When the invaders advanced, the Vietnamese vanished. When the invaders starved, the Vietnamese returned. The psychological toll mounted. The Mongols began to fear the shadows. Their enemies were ghosts, appearing only to strike. Vietnamese strategy, guerrilla genius, and total war. Trần Hưng Đạo used guerrilla warfare, psychological tactics, misinformation. Local populations were fully mobilized. Farmers, blacksmiths, monks. Roads were destroyed. Rivers blocked. Supplies vanished. Vietnam didn't just resist, it adapted, using terrain, time, and unity to fight a war of attrition. Traps were laid in forests. Scouts moved like phantoms. Soldiers melted into the population. Even music was weaponized. Gongs and drums used to signal ambushes, strike fear, confuse. The Mongol playbook fails, cultural misunderstandings. Mongols assumed Vietnamese would fight conventionally. Vietnamese refused direct confrontation until conditions favored them. Mongol chain of command faltered. They couldn't coordinate across mountains and rivers. The Mongols wrote the rules of war, but Vietnam never played by them. Messages sent from Kublai Khan arrived too late. Generals argued. Morale broke down. The Mongol mindset, dominate through overwhelming force, meant nothing in a war of attrition. Third invasion, 1287 to 1288. Naval catastrophe and final defeat. Mongols returned with a huge fleet under Omar Khan. Trần Hưng Đạo baited them into the Bach Dang River, where wooden stakes had been planted beneath the water. At low tide, the Vietnamese attacked. The tide came in. The stakes rose. The fleet was annihilated. Thousands perished. It was a trap worthy of legend, like Hannibal at Cannae, but in the water. This was not just a tactical victory. It was poetic justice. Nature itself joined the battle. Legacy of Trần Hưng Đạo and the Vietnamese spirit. Trần Hưng Đạo is now a national hero, worshipped in temples as a near-divine protector. His writings, especially the Appeal to the Troops, are still studied today. The resistance became part of the national mythos. When asked what to do if the Mongols returned, Trần Hưng Đạo answered simply, "Fight to the death." Statues of him stand in cities, stories are told in schools, and his name echoes whenever Vietnam stands in defiance. Lessons for the world: asymmetric warfare and psychological victory. Small, determined forces can defeat empires. Psychological warfare, unity, terrain mastery, and resilience win wars. Vietnam's strategy echoed through history, from Spanish guerrillas to Afghan resistance. This was more than military victory. It was psychological dominance, a message to the world. The jungle eats empires. The story became a blueprint for rebels, revolutionaries, resistance. Even Ho Chi Minh cited Trần Hưng Đạo during Vietnam's 20th century struggles. What happened next? Aftermath and regional impact. Kublai Khan never returned. His empire overstretched and weakened. Vietnam remained independent, confident, and inspired. Southeast Asia began developing stronger, more unified kingdoms with shared resistance ethos. The Mongol dream of total domination died in the rivers of Vietnam. Meanwhile, the Yuan dynasty bled money and manpower. Kublai's prestige was tarnished. The failure in Vietnam was not just military, it was ideological. Closing reflections: the helmet that told a story. This helmet, this worn piece of armor, survived what millions could not. It carries the scars of history, but also the spirit of a people who refused to kneel. Vietnam didn't just win a war. It defined what it means to fight for home, for land, and for legacy. And even today, in the winds of the jungle, the echoes of that defiance still roar. And in every raindrop that falls on Bach Dang River, you can almost hear a whisper, "We are not afraid." The Mongols wrote history, in blood and fire, but Vietnam wrote it in defiance. If you felt the heartbeat of resistance in this story, subscribe, because history isn't just about who conquered the world, but who stood tall when the world came crashing in.